50th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, my dear friend, the late lamented Roger Scruton, wrote a column that seems very appropriate tonight. He reflected on how it had felt to return to Czechoslovakia, to Brno, in 1990, just 6 years after he'd been arrested there for assisting the dissident Samizdat publisher Jiří Müller. Let me quote Roger. "I felt the exhilarating presence all around me of real spiritual change. An opportunity existed to introduce free institutions, legal foundations, and civic initiatives into a society inoculated, as I thought, against the socialist disease. For a brief moment, I allowed my pessimistic shield to drop." Well, that shield did not stay down for very long. Back in London, at Birkbeck College, it was already obvious that there would be no fall of the Berlin Wall, no revolution against real existing socialism in academia. Already in November 1989, Roger had been struck by the fact that it was not he who was invited to comment on the revolutionary events in Central and Eastern Europe, but Eric Hobsbawm, a lifelong communist, and Perry Anderson, the founder of the New Left Review. Roger's pessimistic shield had to go back up. "In the modern world," he wrote in 2009, "there will always be a section of society that puts equality first and regards liberty as a dubious asset benefiting only the few. I no longer believed that people would try to rescue civil society from the state, or that they would see law, institutions, and national culture as the foundations of a free and prosperous social order. The same spirit of resentment that had animated the Communist Party had returned in softer forms." As he put it, "Fanatics and nihilists continue to dominate the university curriculum, and there prevails in our universities today the same suspicion of power, property, hierarchy, and liberty that was in the ascendant 20 years ago." Ladies and gentlemen, the Common Sense Society appealed to Roger Scruton's rarely visible, but never entirely extinguished, optimistic spirit, which the pessimistic shield existed to protect. We at the Common Sense Society acknowledge, of course, that he was right that the same old malignant spirit of resentment would keep illiberal socialist tyrannies in power long after the fall of the Soviet Union, not only in Cuba, as we've heard tonight, but also in North Korea, in Venezuela, and of course in China. And Roger was right too, that that spirit would refuse to be dislodged, would actually get a new lease of life in Western universities. And sadly, things have only worsened in the dozen years since Roger wrote. What has changed, I think, is not that the left dominates the faculties of the major Western universities, though its dominance has certainly increased. The new and depressing reality is that so many students have embraced a new version of illiberal ideology, which my wife Ayaan Hirsi Ali was one of the first to call wokeism. Now, to me, what's distinctive about wokeism is not so much its tendency to make outlandish claims about racial and gender identity, the former utterly immutable, the latter bewilderingly fluid, as its intolerant tactics which are designed to make its strange creed an orthodoxy. As Eric Kaufman has shown in his most recent research for the Manhattan Institute, whereas 8 in 10 people over the age of 55 oppose teaching school children that the United States was founded on racism and remains systemically racist, by contrast, a majority of young people support teaching those notions. Well, you might say the generations can agree to disagree, except that younger people don't believe that disagreement with their view is legitimate. When asked about political correctness, are you generally in favour of it, it protects against discrimination, or against it, it stifles freedom of speech, respondents under 30 endorsed political correctness by a 50 to 29 margin. Those over 50 opposed it, 47 to 30. But this generation gap is even stranger than I've told you so far. The under 30s agreed by a 48 to 27 margin that, I quote, "My fear of losing my job or reputation due to something I said or posted online is a justified price to pay to protect historically disadvantaged groups." Only 17% of those over 50 took that view. I find that itself quite remarkable. But it's even more baffling than that. 45% of under 30s said they worried about losing their jobs because, and I quote, "someone misunderstands something you have said or done, takes it out of context, or posts something from your past online." Yet they themselves are in favour of the very cancel culture that creates that risk. That is cognitive dissonance to the max when you come to think of it. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the kind of thing the Common Sense Society is against. Not critical race theory itself, which, and here I'm going to disagree with Governor DeSantis respectfully. I think it's a mistake for the right to try to ban critical race theory. We are both against making it compulsory and against banning it, because we are in favour fundamentally of free thought, free speech, and free debate. That is the essence of the Common Sense Society. In an essay I was delighted to see quoted in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week, Roger Scruton recalled Tocqueville's argument in Democracy in America that a network of voluntary associations was the essential ingredient of this country's decentralized democracy, the distinctive form of order that flourished in the United States and thereby limited the size and power of the central government. The role of conservatism, Roger argued, was, and I quote, "to map out the true domain of government and the limits beyond which action by the government is a trespass on the freedom of the citizen." Not for a long time. Perhaps not since 1945 have we so urgently needed to reassert those limits in the face of a strange, unholy alliance of officious public health bureaucrats intent on making emergency powers and regulations permanent, and submissive snowflakes who seem only too eager to give up all their individual liberties in the name of safety. And there I do agree, and I agree very strongly with Governor DeSantis' view. Like Tocqueville's 19th century associations, the Common Sense Society proposes to solve the problem that Roger identified 12 years ago by stepping outside the formal structures of academic institutions in thrall to wokeism and the overmighty state that wokeism craves, and say simply, enough. We shall read what we wish. We shall think what we wish. We shall say what we wish. And we shall publish what we wish. Now, that kind of thing may seem insufficiently pessimistic, and perhaps Roger would have found those words naive. And yet, just as in a time of plague, the key thing is to increase the body's resistance, so we really must increase the brain's resistance when the plague is caused by a mind virus. One can, of course, recover from infection and acquire immunity that way, just as many neoconservatives in the 1970s and 1980s were former leftists who'd been mugged by reality. But in my experience, a vaccine, if you will, is generally a better bet. At worst, your dose of what my son Thomas calls wokeid-19 will be a mild one should you suffer a breakthrough infection. So I would therefore invite you to support the Common Sense Society as a kind of high-efficacy vaccine of the mind, not a mandatory one, I hasten to add, a voluntary one. We are in Florida after all. Or if you prefer, you can think of common sense as just a highly effective therapeutic against the mind virus. It's in this spirit that we honoured Rosa Maria Paya earlier this evening, and it's in this spirit that we're about to honour one of the very few thinkers in the world today who can match Roger Scruton when it comes to sheer courage. Now, it would be wrong to call Jordan Peterson Roger's heir. Not until he takes up fox hunting will that be a legitimate designation. But at lunch today, Jordan said something with which I think Roger would have agreed. We progress in life, he said, from innocence to cynicism. But we must advance beyond cynicism if we're to flourish as human beings. I hope I'm not misquoting you, Jordan. It struck me very forcefully. In much the same way, I think, Roger's pessimistic shield was merely protective of his innate hopefulness about the human condition. Ladies and gentlemen, it's in that spirit of well-armed hopefulness that we have assembled here tonight to award the prize that bears Roger Scruton's name. Thank you very much indeed.